Joining us now to discuss this and much more, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. Secretary Bessent, thank you so much for being here. Always a pleasure. So let's just start with this SNAP ruling, because two federal judges ruled Friday night the White House must tap into the contingency funds to partially cover SNAP benefits that expired this weekend due to the shutdown. Yesterday, the court clarified that at least a partial payment needs to be made by Wednesday. When can we expect the Trump administration to make these payments?
Well, President Trump just truthed out that he needs to hear from the courts how this is going to be done. And Jake, as you know, the best way for SNAP benefits to get paid is for five Democrats to cross the aisle and reopen the government.
Right, but there is this contingency fund, and as recently as September 30th, the Agricultural Department had a memo saying that these funds, the contingency funds, I think it's about $5 or $6 billion, could be used to pay these benefits. Now, it would only be 2 or 3 weeks, but that's a lot for people who need the food.
Well, President Trump just, as I said, President Trump just truthed out that he's very anxious to get this done, and it's got to go through the courts. The courts keep jamming up things. Democrats are in the middle of a civil war, and they should just open the government. That is the easiest way to do this.
Is the administration going to appeal the ruling by the judge? Is that what you mean by the courts need to weigh in? Because the courts have weighed in.
No, but there's a process that has to be followed, so we got to figure out what the process is. President Trump wants to make sure that people get their food benefits.
So it could be done by Wednesday?
Could be.
Okay.
Could be. And 5 Democratic senators could cross the aisle and open the government by Wednesday.
Let's turn to trade, because that's been obviously your focus for several weeks. You're just back from China. President Trump called the summit with President Xi a great success. China's biggest concession was it suspended the export controls on these rare earth minerals that were used for our phones and other things. Trump said this settled the issue. The conservative Wall Street Journal editorial board, however, says the deal mostly restores the status quo that prevailed in May, and that if Mr. Trump wants to deter Chinese mercantilism, he needs a new strategy and more allies. What's your response to their view of this?
Well, I couldn't disagree with that more. Jake, what are the sources of U.S. strength, and how does China view us? We're the greatest military power in the world. Number 2, we have the greatest economy. We have the reserve currency. And number 3, it's our innovation and technology. And everything that came out of the conference between President Trump and President Xi, they gave the U.S. more leverage. Now, China has invoked this rare earth export regime. They did it once on April 4th for rare earth magnets, and they tried it again on October 8th. On October 8th, the president very forcefully pushed back. He threatened to add 100% tariffs to Chinese products, and we were able to negotiate a 1-year pushback, or a 1-year suspension for this licensing regime. And the licensing regime, let me tell you, is for everything that contains rare earths produced in China that has 0.01%. It was completely unworkable. And Jake, it wasn't the US versus China, it's China versus the world. They put it on the whole world, and the whole world pushed back. President Trump, the leader of the free world, they pushed back on behalf of the whole world.
So do you disagree with the assessment that all this deal really does is reset things to where they were in May, before a lot of this trade war began?
Well, I think it's naive for the Wall Street Journal editorial board, who I call a bunch of grumpy old men, to think that the Chinese weren't going to roll out these rare earth restrictions. They've been putting this plan together for 25, 30 years, and the U.S. has been asleep at the switch. And now this administration, we're going to go at warp speed over the next 1-2 years, and we're going to get out from under this sword that the Chinese have over us, and they have it over the whole world. And this time, we have rallied the allies, and so it is going to be all the Western democracies, the Asian democracies, and India are also going to join us in this, in trying to form our own supply chains. We don't want to decouple from China, but we need to de-risk. They've shown themselves to be an unreliable partner in many areas.
Let's talk about Canada for 1 second, because while this deal is going through, the president imposed a 10% tariff, additional tariff, on Canada because he didn't like this ad that Ontario had put out featuring President Reagan talking about tariffs. The Prime Minister of Canada has apologized to President Trump for that ad. When can we expect that 10% tariff to be taken
Well,
down?
he hasn't put on a 10% tariff. He threatened to put on a 10%
So he didn't
tariff.
actually do it.
It hasn't been put on yet. And Jake, this is unacceptable that I read that the Premier of Ontario spent $75 million sending propaganda across the U.S. border via
Well, it's just Ronald Reagan's own words.
via our airwaves. Via our own airwaves. You know, it's the equivalent of election interference. Nobody likes foreign election interference. Nobody likes foreign governments trying to sway public opinion for their own good.
So the 10% tariff has not been enacted, and it might not be enacted.
You know, we'll see. I do think it was a big setback for the Canadian government, and you know, this Premier of Ontario should be ashamed. He's probably still smarting from the Blue Jays' loss last night.
Well, that's harsh. And congratulations to our Dodger friends out there. Let's talk about this week, because on Wednesday, the Supreme Court is going to hear arguments in two cases related to President Trump's tariffs. First of all, is President Trump planning on attending the oral arguments? And second of all, given the fact that tariffs are the province of Congress according to the Constitution, even though there is this exception for emergency tariffs, what makes you think that you guys will win this case?
Because the president is implementing the tariffs under an emergency authority, and I actually think that the Chinese actions on October 8th by threatening the entire world with rare earth export controls that could have slowed down or shut down the Western manufacturing system by the threatening 100% tariffs under the IEEPA authority, the president was able to get the Chinese to delay this. So if that's not an emergency, I don't know what is. But Jake, if we look back to the spring, the president put 20% fentanyl tariffs on China, and now brought China to the table. They are going to make an earnest effort to stop sending precursor drugs to North America, killing hundreds of thousands of Americans every year. And if the fentanyl deaths are not an emergency, I don't know what is. So he is using these powers under an emergency act, and those are all emergencies.
Is President Trump going to be at the court on Wednesday?
I haven't seen his schedule.
You haven't seen his schedule. Are you going to be there?
Sorry?
Are you going to go?
I'm not planning on going.
You're not planning on going. President Obama is out on the campaign trail, and not surprisingly, he's been pretty critical of President Trump. Take a listen.
He has been focused on some critical issues like paving over the Rose Garden so folks don't get mud on their shoes, and building a $300 million ballroom. And if you don't get an invitation to the next White House shindig, you can always watch the festivities on Trump's live feed on Truth Social.
Now, these comments came within a day of the president hosting a Gatsby, pardon me, a Gatsby-themed Halloween party at Mar-a-Lago while SNAP benefits are set to run out. And you can understand the general theme. I've heard Republicans even express concern about the general optics here of parties and lavish ballrooms and such, while a lot of Americans are hurting. What's your response?
My response is that the Democrats should reopen the government. And you know, I believe President Obama played a record amount of golf of any president. So, you know, I'm not sure why he's out there throwing stones. And you know, that it's unfortunate. We've got 52 Republican senators who have voted to reopen the government, 3 brave Democrats, and I'm calling here on 5 moderate Democrats to be heroes. Let's reopen the government.
This week, the Fed voted to lower interest rates another 1/4 point to its lowest level in 3 years. However, the central bank's newest official, Stephen Myron, is warning that if the Fed doesn't continue to lower interest rates rapidly, the U.S. could face a recession. Do you agree that the U.S. is at risk of facing a recession?
I believe that we are in a transition period here, as we are seeing the Trump administration has cut back on government spending, Jake. What has gone unnoticed during the shutdown is for the fiscal year that ends September 30th, the government spent less than it did the year before, and because the GDP grew, the GDP, which had been 6.4, the deficit to GDP, which had been 6.4, 6.5% deficit, the highest when we weren't at war, weren't in a recession ever, we were able to bring it down to 5.9%. So we are bringing down government spending, and I would think that the Fed would want to assist with that, because if we go back and look, MIT just published a study that said 42% of the great inflation of 2022 came from excess government spending. So if we are contracting spending, then I would think inflation would be dropping. If inflation is dropping, then the Fed should be cutting rates.
But do you think that the U.S. is at risk of a recession if the Fed does not continue to drop rates?
I think that we are in good shape, but I think that there are sectors of the economy that are in recession, and the Fed has caused a lot of distributional problems with their policies. I wrote a 7,000-word essay on that. We've seen the biggest hindrance for housing here that are mortgage rates. So, if the Fed brings down mortgage rates, then they can end this housing recession. Low-end consumers who have gotten killed under President Biden, these high rates are hurting them because they have debt, not assets. So I think that there are sections of the economy that could go into recession.
All right, Secretary Besson, thank you so much. We really appreciate you being here.
Fighting so long and so hard that they don't know what the they're doing.